Welcome back to the channel. Today is Thursday, July 30th. We're now 96 days away from the November elections, less than 100 days to go. And while 96 days still seems like an eternity, it's going to go by pretty quickly. So today in this Senate election video, we're going to, once again, as we always do, break down all 35 races, and you know the drill. We're going to go west to east, beginning in Alaska over here, and make our way all the way eventually up to the state of Maine. And this time we're going to spend a little bit less time on these sort of more surefire races and instead spend much more time on the states that we feel actually have a chance of flipping from one seat to the other. So let's get right into it. In the state of Alaska, Democrats felt that they had themselves a real shot at this seat because Al Gross, who is of course the independent candidate, was generating a little bit of buzz, both in fundraising and in national attention. Was of course endorsed by the Democratic Party, the whole works. But so far the polling is not backing him up. He is losing to Dan Sullivan and losing considerably. The first set of polling had him down by about 5 points, and another had him down by about 13 points. And what's interesting about this race is that so far Joe Biden has been outperforming Al Gross, and that's surprising because this state has typically overperformed for the Democrats have typically overperformed the presidential races kind of the same way they do up in Montana, just a little bit. But for right now, even after the gaffe that Dan Sullivan made, accidentally tweeting out a photo of him with Elijah Cummings instead of John Lewis, I'm not going to label this safe. But I'm going to label it likely for the Republicans, and that's an important retention for them because that was a state the Democrats had on their mind as a potential flip, just as they have a real shot to flip the House race there. In the state of Oregon, used to be a kind of a competitive state, but the Democrats are not going to have any problems there. Jeff Merkley is going to be fine. State of Idaho, we've talked about how it's a state that should be discussed maybe for the future because Boise is growing, but nothing to discuss there. Now, let's get into the first real competitive state, and that is the state of Arizona. Now, as we know, the Democrats need a minimum of 3 seats, possibly as many as 5 seats, to retake the Senate. And the reason for that is they currently have 47 seats, but we expect them to lose one in the state of Alabama, pushing them back down to 46, meaning that they, assuming Donald Trump loses the election, which as of now it looks like he will, the vice president will be able to break that tie at 50. So they need probably 4 and possibly 5 seats. So their first opportunity to do so is in the state of Arizona. As we know, Martha McSally is far from a very liked candidate, and she is getting pounded by Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, the former veteran, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, a real good candidate for the Democratic Party. They were really, really excited when he announced his candidacy. He was pretty much their top recruit for this seat. And of course, you know, in a matter of just a couple of years, the Democrats have pretty much made this not even just a competitive state, but a state that they can almost consider a blue state altogether. You know, as of now, it's looking more and more likely like this state is going to vote for Joe Biden. It's going to vote for a Democrat on the presidential level, and it's going to have 2 senators, 2 Democratic senators. Of course, Doug Ducey is still the Republican governor, but for a state that elected John McCain all those times, and Jeff Flake, many times over, pretty remarkable that the Democrats now have more House members than the Republicans from this state, and it looks like Mark Kelly is going to win. And so all the polling data with less than 100 days to go, there was one poll that was just released either today or the day before that showed Mark Kelly only up by 2 points on Martha McSally. I forget the pollster there, but that shouldn't be too much of a cause for concern. At the end of the day, it could just be one poll. That it was also a very small sample size, less than 500 voters, and at the end of the day, he still won the poll. So there's not too much to be concerned about for Mark Kelly. I'm going to make that a likely Democratic pickup. In the state of Montana, this is one of the most fascinating races to break down. As we know, there are 3 statewide races in addition to the presidential race in this state this time around. The governorship is up. Steve Bullock, very popular governor, 2-term Democratic governor from the state of Montana, is obviously relinquishing his seat and running for the Senate. He is challenging Steve Daines. So the governorship is also up for grabs, and Mike Cooney, the Democratic lieutenant governor, is running against Greg Gianforte, who represents this lone district from the state of Montana. And so to replace Greg Gianforte, Matt Rosendale, who I think has run for office almost 10 times now, is running against Kathleen Williams, who I believe also ran for this House seat in 2018. All three races are close, but the closest race and the one that the Democrats feel they have the best chance to win. I apologize for the fluctuating light patterns here as my outlet keeps going in and out here. But in the state of Montana, it would appear as though Steve Bullock, the Democrat, has a good chance to defeat Steve Daines. Now, earlier on, I had this as a tilt Democrat. But in recent weeks, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, the Bullock's candidacy has slipped just a little bit in favor of Steve Daines. This is kind of a dead heat right now, and if anything, I'm going to label this just as a tilt for the Republican Party. Because I think this is kind of where the voters in Montana draw the line just a little bit in terms of, even though Steve Bullock is extremely well liked, remember, this is a state that went for Donald Trump by over 20 points in the 2016 election, and they still voted for Steve Bullock. So that means that, voters, diehard Trump supporters and Republicans like Steve Bullock enough to vote for him, and they're going to probably vote for him again. The problem is, if you just if you examine it from the standpoint of, do we really think that the state of Montana is going to elect 2 Democratic senators? And I just don't think they're going to do that. And I think that Steve Daines, who has gotten a huge boost from the National the Republican Senatorial Committee, and I think it's just a matter of Steve Bullock facing an uphill climb, considering he is not somebody that I think has the favor of being in a true swing state. This is just a state that can elect Democrats, and of course has now reelected Jon Tester 2 different times after he replaced Max Baucus all those years later. So this is still absolutely a real race, and Steve Bullock may very, very well win this. In fact, over these 96 days, I would expect Steve Bullock to pull ahead eventually, just because this is a Democratic wave year, but I don't think this is going to happen this time for the Democrats. So they still have that one pickup in Arizona, but I think they're going to come up maybe 1 point short, or even half a point short in Montana. Wyoming, kind of a running joke at this point, but nothing to talk about. Now, in the state of Colorado, as we know, John Hickenlooper is by far the best candidate that the Democratic Party could have hoped for this seat. He is challenging Cory Gardner, the incumbent. Colorado, of course, used to sort of be, back in the Obama years, it was considered a swing state. But it's not really a swing state anymore. Okay, it's pretty much shifted to the left. Hillary Clinton, of course, was able to take that state, which pretty much tells you all you need to know about the state of Colorado, because it pretty much has shifted entirely to the left. Denver is a big liberal stronghold for them. Re-elected a Democratic governor after John Hickenlooper decided to briefly run for president. Now he has shifted gears and is running for Senate, and he is way ahead of Cory Gardner. There was one poll either a day or 2 ago that had him up by just 6 points. Which might just give the Gardner camp just a hair of hope. And in fact, a lot of people expect John Hickenlooper to win this race by 15 points. I don't think that's going to happen. I actually think that this is going to end up being a race that Hickenlooper probably wins by less than 10 points. I think this is going to be a little closer than people think. But it's not necessarily that competitive a race at this point, because there's still a long way to go, and because of that poll that had it narrowing up just a little bit, and because, of course, the Republicans have the incumbency advantage, I'm going to put this as a likely rather than a safe Democratic state. But there's already 2 pickups for the Democrats, one in Arizona, one in Colorado, but as we know, they've missed out in Montana. New Mexico, kind of like Colorado, used to be considered a swing state, no longer. Even though this is an open seat, that's going the Democratic Party's way. So now they're up to 39 to 34, but as we know, it really comes down to just 6 states or so. Now in the state of South Dakota. Of course, remember in recent memory, the Democrats had both senators from this state. Tim Johnson, was a longtime Democratic senator all the way up until 2015. But this was a state that the Republicans targeted and eventually got flipped back in their direction. The state Democratic Party of the state of South Dakota does extremely good work. They're known to be one of the best state parties for either party in the entire country. Of course, they really challenged Kristi Noem, the current governor of the state, very hard. She won with only about 52% of the vote. So that, gives cause to pause just a little bit, but Mike Rounds is not going to lose. He's going to be just fine. Same in Nebraska. Ben Sasse isn't going anywhere. Now we get to Kansas. The Kansas Senate primary is next Tuesday on August 4th. We've been waiting a long time for it, and that comes down to Chris Kobach, who ran for governor back in 2018 and shockingly lost to Democrat Laura Kelly. That was one of a very, very, probably the biggest surprise on that election night, that it went the Democratic Party's way for governor in the state of Kansas. And this time around, he's again running for the Senate, and he's primarying against Roger Marshall, who's a much more, conventional Republican. The Democratic Party has been taking out ads trying to boost Chris Kobach and attacking his opponent Marshall, trying to get Kobach nominated because they know that Barbara Bollier, the former Democrat herself, would actually have a pretty good chance to defeat Chris Kobach. Instead of Roger Marshall. Polling data indicates that Bollier actually would have a chance to defeat Roger Marshall, but a better chance to defeat Chris Kobach. And in fact, if Chris Kobach becomes a nominee, which right now I think he is narrowly, just barely expected to become, I think the Democrats have themselves a real shot at this. But because this is Kansas, because I find it a little bit hard to believe that the party is going to, or that the state is going to elect a Democrat twice in statewide races. I think that turnout was a little bit low in this state in 2018, and Laura Kelly was able to take advantage of just a little bit of a surprise in the lower turnout. Chris Kobach wasn't a good candidate, that whole thing. I think the Republican Party will have their act together a little bit more, and as a result, I have this as a tilt in their favor. So those are two big retentions for them, one in Kansas, one in Montana, also one in Alaska. Oklahoma, nothing to discuss. Donald Trump won this state won every single county in this state in 2016. Nothing to discuss. Now, Texas, it's kind of surprising how there is a Senate race here, but this time there's no one really talking about it, because in 2018, this was a huge Senate race between Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, and on the presidential level, Joe Biden actually has a chance to win Texas. Which, again, no Democrat has won the state of Texas on the presidential level since I'm going to pause for a second here as sort of a trivia question. You can pause the video and look it up and cheat, but if you guessed Jimmy Carter, you are correct. So the Democratic Party is optimistic that they have a real chance to win here. In fact, they're up by a little less than a point on the 538 polling average. But of course, this is a Senate election prediction video, and John Cornyn so far is facing no problems against MJ Hager. Now, there is some time, and MJ Hager is known to be a very good candidate. So I'm not going to put that as likely. Instead, I am going to put it lean, but think of it sort of as a in between lean and likely. MJ Hager is a resilient figure. She's known to be a good fundraiser, but John Cornyn is not quite as unliked as Ted Cruz, and is probably going to end up being just fine. Tina Smith, pretty much the same. Up in Minnesota, this kind of for a little while was considered a state that the Republican Party felt that they could target on the presidential level, but I think that those hopes have dashed, even though in the last 3 or 4 weeks that race has tightened up just a hair. But I think on the Senate level, Tina Smith is not going to really have any problems. The Republicans really weren't able to elect or nominate, rather, any notable Republican. All right, big one here in the state of Iowa. When, about 6 or 8 weeks ago, when the map had really begun to get settled, when most of the primaries had been held and, we had begun to really see what the matchups were going to be, Iowa was not really on the map yet for the Democratic Party. Joni Ernst was up for re-election, and people sort of took this one for granted a little bit. However, all this time later, this is one of the biggest races now across the board. Teresa Greenfield is the challenger against Joni Ernst, and she is currently leading, which is really surprising. This is going to be a real razor thin, tight race. And Teresa Greenfield has now won 5 consecutive polls against Joni Ernst. Now, all of them she's won within the margin of error. She's won all of them. The biggest one she won by was 3 points. But it's got to be concerning for Joni Ernst because not only is she losing in the polls, but she's also being outraised, and this is a Democratic wave year. And remember, as of 2018, the Democrats have 3 of the 4 House districts in the state of Iowa. And the fourth, mind you, is up here in the northwestern portion of the state, which for years was controlled by Steve King, who's since been voted out. So there's reason to believe that this is shifting a little bit to the left. And even though it's probably going to vote for Donald Trump on the presidential level, that race is also narrowing a little bit as well. So Teresa Greenfield right now is just barely ahead of Joni Ernst. There's a long way to go. And in this portion of the country, we've sometimes seen how Democrats can potentially be a hair overstated. Remember, Claire McCaskill lost her race by about 6 points in 2018, and she had herself some good polling results in the weeks leading up to that election. Same as Joe Donnelly, same as, well, not Heidi Heitkamp, but Bill Nelson did as well. So the Democrats maybe sometimes are a little overstated here. Of course, they for years had a Democratic senator from Missouri. They had one from Arkansas, from crying out loud, and one from Louisiana, all in recent memory. But there is reason to believe that the Democratic Party might be slightly overstated in the state of Iowa. Now, I'm going to go against the grain a little bit here. I just think that even though Teresa Greenfield is ahead in the polls narrowly, I think Joni Ernst has enough time to just barely edge this one out. This is going to, I think if she does win, which I'm obviously predicting she will here, I think she will win by less than 1 point. This is going to be a razor thin race. Don't be surprised one bit if the Democrats are able to get this one flipped in their favor. But for right now, Joni Ernst wins, and that's a big one because that basically eliminates much of an opportunity for the Democrats to get an outright majority. Because even though they've won in Arizona and Colorado, they've now missed out on Kansas, Iowa, and Montana, and there aren't many pickup opportunities left. Arkansas, nothing to discuss there. Louisiana, nothing to discuss there. In fact, in Louisiana, the Democrats only earlier this week fielded a candidate for this race. State of Illinois, Dick Durbin is a very popular senator. He's not going anywhere. Safe Democratic retention. In the state of Michigan, this one was one the Republicans had circled on their calendar because they thought that John James, the Republican, had a chance to defeat Gary Peters, who's not a very well-known Democrat. John James, ran a pretty good race against Debbie Stabenow in 2018. He got 45% of the vote. But this time, Gary Peters is extremely far ahead of John James, and any boost that James was going to get from speaking at the convention has since been dashed, as the convention, of course, has been canceled. Or, well, at least is not being held in Jacksonville. So I think I'm not going to put it safe just because Michigan is still a little bit of a purple state, but it's going to be likely for Gary. It's going to be likely for Gary Peters. Big retention there for the Democrats between Minnesota and Michigan, and to a lesser extent, New Mexico. Those are good retentions for them. Mitch McConnell, of course, is up for re-election, but there's nothing to really be too worried about for him. Amy McGrath, for a time, looked like she was going to have a chance to put together a pretty good fight. Still has a ton of money available to her, and she's going to be able to unleash that and run a lot of pretty brutal ads, but polling just doesn't back it up right now. I have Mitch McConnell winning this, honestly, in a safe race. I know that some of the polls had that closer, but he's not going to lose this race. Tennessee, nothing to discuss there. Mississippi. Kind of interesting how this is just a rematch, kind of the way we're seeing up here in Michigan. Mike Espy is just running again. They have the same exact race against Cindy Hyde-Smith, the one he did in that general election. And it's just kind of unfortunate for the Democratic Party because they're just, 2 years is not enough time for there to be a big defection from people who voted from Cindy Hyde-Smith to suddenly turn around and vote for Mike Espy. Over 10 years or even 5 years, maybe. But in 2 years, why is somebody going to change their mind after voting for Cindy Hyde-Smith in 2018? And so I don't really see why the Democrats are putting that much money into this race. I think it's possible that Mike Espy could get 46% of the vote, but that, shouldn't fool them into thinking that they can win this race, because the reality is they're not going to, and Sidney Hyde Smith's going to win. Now, in Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, of course, is not exactly a robust candidate for the Republican Party. He's a former football coach. He has as much political experience as I do. And, Doug Jones, on the other hand, is a very well, nationally at least, very well liked guy. His approval rating in Alabama is pretty low. And I think that Doug Jones is going to be able to put up a better fight than people think. He'll definitely get over 40%. The minority turnout will be high. He's very popular amongst the African American community in Alabama. But Tommy Tuberville is going to be able to win this race. And, obviously we saw quite a bit of the state of, just what the state of the Republican Party is after that Senate primary, where Jeff Sessions, who was Trump's, first supporter, and, in his, campaign ads, put on the Make America Great Again hat, and it was pretty overt about his support of Trump. He still lost by 20 points. So making this a likely for the Republicans. I think Doug Jones will hang in there for a little while, but he's not going to pull through. So right now, this is kind of breaking the Republicans' way so far. They've lost in Arizona, they've lost in Colorado, but they've hung on in Montana, they've hung on in Kansas, they've hung on in Iowa. They've kind of avoided a disaster in Kansas, and they're taking care of business in Texas and Alabama. Now in Georgia. The special election, I'm labeling that safe because as of now, it looks like 2 Republicans are going to advance to that runoff in January. But as for the other Senate race, the Democrats have a little bit better of a chance. And now recently, in just the last 12 hours, David Perdue kind of screwed up a little bit here. His campaign ran an ad against Jon Ossoff, a Jewish guy, with an ad that appeared to show him with an enlarged nose. And for my Jewish friends out there, of course, I myself am Jewish. That's obviously kind of a stereotypical slight. And, even though Georgia is not home to a, big, giant Jewish community, there are some there, and that's not going to, rub off too well on them. So that's, not going to help David Perdue's cause. Now, he's consistently ahead by 4 to 7 points or so. So I'm going to put this as a tilt Republican, but I think it's a little bit closer to lean. I think that Jon Ossoff is going to do better than people expect here. I think it's possible that he could get around 48% of that vote. Because, again, Democratic wave year, fired up Democratic base. Jon Ossoff does a pretty good job with bringing in voters of pretty much any demographic onto his side. And, of course, he's a pretty robust fundraiser. He was, of course, at the scene of the most expensive House race in United States history real early in Trump's term. South Carolina, Jamie Harrison continues to set fundraising records. The last 4 polls, Lindsey Graham won every single one of them by 7, by 4, by 3, and by 2, but that is evidence of the fact that the race could be tightening up. And it's kind of similar to Colorado, because that one poll showed Hickenlooper only up by 6 points. However, this was 4 straight polls that had that lead for Lindsey Graham shrinking a little bit. Graham's approval rating is low in the state of South Carolina, another state with a big minority population. And so, as a result, I'm not going to label this safe. I'm going to label this likely, because I think that Lindsey Graham, is facing a challenger that over these next 97 days is going to put together a blitz of attack ads. And, who knows? I mean, this race could change a little bit. And it's possible that Jamie Harrison could absolutely stun people. But as of now, it's likely. All right, North Carolina is a big one. In North Carolina, this was one of those states that was a total dead heat. Meaning it was just a basic tie about 6 weeks ago. Cal Cunningham, the Democrat, has firmly established the upper hand in this race. We've seen polls with him up by 7, by 8, by 9, most recently by 12 points in the state of North Carolina, which gives him a lead of, I think, about 6 points is the overall average for Cal Cunningham in this race. Tom Tillis is in deep trouble right now, the Republican incumbent. And Donald Trump is in trouble as well. In fact, Cal Cunningham is even outperforming him. And what's interesting about this state is that in this state, there are basically 4 elections happening. There are 2 House districts that the Democrats expect to flip in the southern portion of the state. Roy Cooper, very popular Democratic governor, is widely expected to win re-election here. And so his presence on the ballot is likely to boost Cal Cunningham a little bit and boost Joe Biden. In fact, there were some people that before it was widely accepted that Biden was going to pick a woman and a black woman that recommended he pick Roy Cooper to be his vice presidential nominee. It was just that the idea of 2 older white men didn't sit too well with independent voters and African American voters and things of that nature. Now, in North Carolina, we're seeing Kyle Cunningham push this one further and further into his column, and he himself has also been raising quite a bit of money. And so I used to have this as a tilt Democrat. I'm changing it now. For the first time, I have this as a lean Democratic pickup, and that's a big one for the Democrats. If they had basically any chance to make it up to number 50, they pretty much had to grab this one, and they have. So that's their third pickup between Arizona, Colorado, and North Carolina. And while we're at it, because we're over here on the East portion, we're going to put this in the Democratic column, that sort of bonus vote, the vice presidential vote. So North Carolina, that's a big pickup for the Democratic Party. State of Virginia obviously was a big Republican stronghold for many years. No longer. It's now a Democratic state, and Mark Warner is not going anywhere. That's a safe pickup or safe retention for him. I believe the Republican is Daniel Gade. He's not beating Mark Warner. West Virginia, nothing to discuss. I'm not even going to talk about it. All right, Delaware, pretty much the same. Safe Democratic state. New Jersey, Cory Booker is going to be just fine. Rhode Island, Jack Reed, going to be just fine. Massachusetts is a state where Ed Markey is expected to be primaried out by Joe Kennedy, the House member who, of course, gave the Democratic response to, I believe it was Trump's first either his first or his second State of the Union address. He was the one who delivered the response. And so, but either way, he's going to be just fine. All right, in New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen, there was a little bit of talk, that this one could be flippable for the Republicans, but they just failed to find a real candidate for this race. There were about 4 or 5 polls that got released in the last day that had Jeanne Shaheen all up by double digits. So she's going to be just fine. Now, this is a state to watch, though, in 2022, because the Republicans could throw Chris Sununu, who's an extremely popular Republican governor, at Maggie Hassan, who won her Senate election in 2016 by 0.1%. It literally does not get any closer than that. And if Chris Sununu is the candidate, because Hassan is up again, you can pretty much take it to the bank that he's going to win. And there were a lot of Republicans that were pretty upset that he did not run for this seat this time, because if he did, that's basically going to ruin the Democratic Party's chances to get that overall majority. But as you see here, we have 1 state left, and we're at 50-49 with the Democrats having the vice presidential nominee. So this last state of Maine basically decides who controls the Senate. And it comes down to Susan Collins, the infamous now Republican senator, against Sarah Gideon, the female Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives from the state of Maine. The Democrats now control the state legislature in Maine. They also flipped the governorship there. Remember, as I've broken down a number of times on my channel, Maine was one of 7 states that flipped from Republican to Democrat in terms of their governor, the others being Michigan and Wisconsin, Illinois, Kansas, New Mexico. And so all those states flipped from Republican governors to Democratic governors. The Republicans flipped the Alaska governor from blue to red. Susan Collins is down to Sarah Gideon, but not by as much as people think. People sort of have expected Susan Collins to lose this. But remember, she's been in the Senate since 1996. And, this is by far the toughest race that she has faced. And she has gone amazingly from America's most popular senator and one who was even endorsed by Democrats, for crying out loud, to America's least popular senator. Remember, she was endorsed by the other senator from the state of Maine who's an independent, but caucuses with the Democrats, that being Angus King. He has not endorsed her this time, and it's now Sarah Gideon's race. And I think it's Sarah Gideon's race to lose. She's currently leading in the polls and giving Susan Collins a real run for her money. So I'm going to put that as a lean Democrat. And there you have it. There's 50-50, but the Democratic Party, according to this map, will officially take control of the U.S. Senate. You add to this map 2 senators from Washington, 2 from Hawaii, 2 from California, 2 from Nevada, 1 from Wisconsin, 1 from Ohio, 1 from Pennsylvania, 2 from Maryland, 2 from New York, 2 from Vermont, 2 from Connecticut, and that comprises all 50 Democratic senators, as opposed to 2 from Utah, 2 from North Dakota, 2 from Missouri, 1 from Wisconsin, 2 from Indiana, 1 from Ohio, 1 from Pennsylvania for the Republicans, and 2 from Florida. So there you have it. And of course, another Republican from Alaska. So there you have it, 50-50. The Republicans winning in Montana, Kansas, Iowa, and Georgia. The Democrats winning in Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, and Maine, while retaining their seats in New Hampshire, Michigan, and Minnesota. So this is what we have. Democrats picking up a net of 4 seats, while the Republicans flip in Alabama and maintain that 50 vote threshold. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Comment down the suggestions below. As always, I will do my best to make a video based on any suggestions you may have and answer questions that you might have. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.